Welcome back. I'm Jordan Kennedy and this is Picture Perspective. Today, we're here to give our perspective on the great succession sell-off. I'm grateful to have my colleague, Andy Hough, our M&A partner, to give his expertise on what we see is a massive succession sell-off over the next 10 years. But before we begin, this is general advice in nature. Please, if you need to take your personal circumstances into consideration, please reach out to one of our advisors. Andy, let's get going.
Thanks, Jordan.
So Andy, the talk on the street is there's a silver tsunami ahead of us. Give us the facts, figures, the reasons why.
Yes, if you look at the stats, there's something like 6 million baby boomers. That's people born between 1946 and 1964 who are coming up to retirement in Australia in the next
My parents.
10 years. Your
Yep.
parents, my parents, everyone's parents.
Yep.
So when you think about that in the context of corporates, there are about 2.5 million corporates in Australia, according to the ABS. And about 40% of those corporates are actually owned by baby boomers.
Wow.
So if my maths is correct, which hopefully it is, that means there's about 1 million businesses in the next 10 years that need a succession plan in place. And therefore we think that's going to be ripe for M&A opportunities.
You seem like you're going to be busy over the next couple of years. What's the starting point to start thinking about selling the business? What are the things you need to start going through? You know, I'm looking at it from a sell side perspective.
Yeah, really good question. So I suppose the first point to make is that there's no real, you can't start preparing early enough in our view. We sometimes get called by founders who, they'll call you up and say, hey, Andy, I want to sell my business and I want to be out by Christmas.
Is that when they say it's worth X and you go, don't know?
Absolutely. And we'll certainly come to valuation. But what I would say is, start with the end in mind. So if you're a founder and you're, thinking at some point in the future you want to sell your business, try and have the end date in mind and then kind of work back from there. Yep. If you're well prepared, then yes, you could potentially sell a business in 6 months, but normally these things take 2 or 3 years in the making.
And I guess give us some insight on some of your engagements. Are they short engagements to go through the sell side period, or is it years and years of journey and little bits along the way?
Yeah, it really depends how prepared businesses are for sale. So often you'll get into a business and actually, the books and records aren't in a good state. It's not in a state where it would be easier for a buyer to acquire, and therefore we have to spend time with those business owners kind of preparing the business for sale. In other situations, the business has been well run and it's well prepared and you can get a quick sale. So the rule of thumb is kind of 4 to 6 months from when the preparation is complete to actually selling the business.
What are some of the clangers that you've seen in sort of ill-prepared businesses?
Yes, there's probably 3 things we talk about when we're thinking about preparing the business for sale. So the first one is kind of business hygiene. So that's relatively straightforward stuff like, do you have annual reports, accounts, have you paid tax on time? All those kind of basic things that if they aren't in order, it's going to be very hard to sell your business. The second thing we encourage founders to think about is kind of what's your secret sauce. So when you're going out to market, telling people why your business is so good and why they should acquire it, what's your elevator pitch? A lot of people can't really articulate why their business is so good.
And also, I'm assuming documentation to protect that purple patch. Like, I'm assuming, taking patents, exclusivity agreements. I'm assuming you go through all those sort of things.
100%. And one thing we often find with kind of owner-managed businesses is they might have a long-standing relationship with a key supplier, and that relationship has been done down the pub 20 years ago with a handshake. And actually, from a buyer's perspective, they want that relationship contracted so that they can documented and contracted. So that's one thing we find. And then the other piece of advice we often give to founders is think about who your buyers are likely to be, and start to form relationships with those buyers now, even if you're 5 or 10 years away from selling the business, because what you're trying to do is plant the seed in the acquirer's mind that your business might be a good business to acquire.
Yeah, and I guess the other facet that I look at is, are there any things that we're missing that we should be doing now that can exponentially improve the outcome? So working through those, is it buying a competitor when we're looking to sell, but we might want to buy a competitor because that increases our multiple and things like that?
Absolutely, and I'm glad you touched on kind of increasing the multiple, because one of the other things that founders often forget is that the acquirer is actually buying the future benefit of the business. So what's happened in the past is kind of irrelevant.
Yep.
So what you're trying to do when you're preparing for sale is think about, okay, well, how can we grow the business? How can we make sustainable growth? And simple things like, having a set of robust forecasts in place and having a track record of actually hitting your forecasts along the way really gives the buyers it gives your business and the buyers more confidence and gives your business more credibility when you take it to market.
And if I was a small business and I was there all the time, is a buyer looking at me going, oh, I'm uncertain about acquiring that business because I don't know how it's going to look with you not in that business? Do we need to separate the me from the business? Is that an important journey as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a bit of that depends on who the ultimate acquirer is going to be. Often, if you're selling the business to a trade competitor, they don't actually want you as the founder to remain in the business long term. Mm-hmm. So part of their synergy is to kind of get you out and wrap your business into their existing business. But certainly if you're thinking about a private equity acquirer, they will want you to remain in the business. So if that's not what you want to do, then you need to almost replace yourself. So find a competent management team. You might already have them within your business, but start to train those guys up and transition those relationships that you have. Because again, if you want to get out, then the acquirer needs to ensure that the value remains in the business.
I'm going to touch on a bit of slang here. Earnouts, retention periods, are they good or bad? Can they add to the value? If I want to go, I just want to go, yep. Right? How do you coach people through those scenarios?
Typically, what I would say is if your main objective is to absolutely maximize value, so achieve the highest price you can for your business, then you're probably going to have to wear some kind of earnout or retention period. If your objective is, yes, you want a good price for your business, but actually your leisure time is more important to you, so you want to get out, then you might be able to get away with no earnout, but that's probably going to lead to a reduced overall valuation. So no two deals, as you'll know, are the same. So it's about being flexible and really taking a step back and thinking, what are my key sale objectives? Because that'll influence kind of the style of deal that you might be prepared to do.
Andy, the tsunami that we're about to see, over the next 10 years, huge amount of transactions. Do you think the economy and the business world has the bandwidth to digest this amount of change coming through? Or do you think we're going to see some different approaches to selling businesses, more, family trade, bigger businesses getting bigger? What do you think we're going to see?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. You're right. I mean, if the numbers play out like we think they will, what we talked about at the start is kind of 1 million potential transactions in Australia in the next 10 years.
Yeah, huge.
Which is huge, right? And what we have started to see, we've seen an infiltration of technology across kind of the deals landscape. So, 5 years ago, it was pretty hard as an acquirer. There's a lot of desktop research required to go and find targets. Now there's kind of AI and sites that can kind of match buyers and sellers. We're seeing more, I suppose, business brokers at the smaller end of the market, again, using technology to try and match buyers and sellers. So I think we'll see more of that. But the reality is, the M&A market in Australia is pretty well developed. There's a lot of advisors out there, a lot of lawyers, a lot of accountants. I think there's enough kind of bandwidth in the system to, and we've all been relatively quiet over the last couple of years, kind of coming out of the post-COVID boom. So I think there's enough slack in the system to pick up most of the deals.
And obviously we've seen an influx of sort of private equity firms landing in Australia and hovering around and trying to do deals. Is that the other outlet as well? Obviously more foreign investment coming in as well? Yeah,
absolutely. And so financial investors have always been there. Private equity, again, have been quiet for the last couple of years in terms of if you look at historical trends. So they are actively looking to deploy. They've got lots of undeployed capital, which they need to actually invest in companies, because the last thing as a PE fund you want to do is return funds to investors. We're also seeing new models, so things like search funds. So these have been popular in the States for probably 20 years, but have just started to infiltrate here in Australia and the broader Asia Pacific region. And in a nutshell, what a search fund is an individual who's backed by private equity who looks to acquire businesses and actually go in there to run the business themselves. So it can be quite a useful tool for founders who are looking for a clean exit. The challenge with search funds is they typically don't pay at high multiples.
And they also want to churn it over, I'm assuming, quickly as well. So some founders might be reluctant to go to those sort of firms or those private equity firms if they feel their business is going to get churned through the process.
Absolutely. It all depends, again, coming back to what we said earlier, depends on your objectives from the transaction in the first place. Because if one of your key objectives is legacy and you want your business to continue 100 years into the future with the brand name, then you can maybe find that deal, but that's going to probably detract from value.
So Andy, at what point do we start looking at valuations of a business when we start going through the transactional process?
Yeah, so business owners normally have a pretty firm view on valuation, and often that's just what they think the business is worth.
Is that a good or a bad thing?
It can be both. I mean, the thing I always think about is no one says or no one thinks that their baby is ugly or has any issues with it. But actually, the value in a business is really what a purchaser is willing to pay for it. And so we often have clients that come to us and they've got an independent valuation done. So they've got a desktop piece of work done, which is great because that kind of informs where we think the range should be. But ultimately, until you go to market and until you kind of run a process and ideally generate competitive tension, that's just a number on a piece of paper. So it's great to have a view as a founder or a business owner as to what your business might be worth. But the only real way to test it is to get out to market.
And obviously valuations move or multiples move in sectors. Is there any hot sectors that you're seeing or different types of businesses that buyers are looking for today that people should be aware of?
Yeah, so people will have seen what's happened in the tech sector, for example. So a couple of years ago, we saw pretty crazy multiples, 20 times revenue.
Yep.
Whether the revenue existed or not.
Yep.
So that sector's come off. We've actually seen quite a lot of interest in sectors like professional services, and interestingly, private equity starting to get interested in those type of sectors. And that's a very different business model. Typically you're selling the skills of people in those businesses. So we've seen some pretty good multiples in that sector. What I would say is that the multiple you can achieve is generally a function of kind of the growth prospects of your business.
Yep.
And that obviously comes back to, is it a good business in a growing industry? So if you've got those two things that you can tick off, then typically you can achieve a pretty good valuation outcome.
So Andy, what are the different buyers that we could look to sell to? What types of buyers are out there?
Yeah, so we typically think about three different pools of buyers. So you've got trade buyers, you've got financial buyers, and then you've got the existing management team. So trade buyers, that's either local or international competitors. One of the key advantages of those businesses is that they're already obviously operating in your industry. So theoretically, they should be able to pay the highest price because they can extract synergies from bolting the two businesses together. One of the key drawbacks is you often don't want to sell to a fierce competitor. Private equity or financial investors, again, if you want to remain in the business and potentially share some of the future upside, then they could be a good home for your business,
partner,
a good partner. And then the management teams, this is quite a popular, I suppose, transaction route, is to transition to the next level of management.
Yeah, MBO sort of
MBO, and often that can be backed by private equity. The advantage there is that they're a team that you already trust, so you're entrusting your business to guys who have already worked with you. The drawback is typically that next level of management aren't necessarily cashed up, so often you have to kind of vendor finance those deals. So they're the three things we see, and what we normally say is trade acquirer generally can pay the most. And the good thing with a trade acquirer, even if you're a very small business, that's a logical home. Whereas if you're a very small business, private equity aren't going to be interested, to be honest.
Yeah, cool. Well, Andy, this has been awesome. I'm really excited about the Silver Tsunami. Thank you very much for sharing your expertise. I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks a lot, Jordan.